Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 317 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm delighted to catch up with Sharon McCormick, who is the proprietor of the Listening Centre and Employment Assistance Programme, also known as an EAP, based in the Midlands. In this interview, Sharon shares her observations on how an ethical EAP operates and the benefit to both clients and employers. So with that said, it's over to you, Ken.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
A very warm welcome to episode 317 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Both Rory Oakes and myself, Ken Kelly, are delighted to welcome you to our three topics today, starting off with ethical, sustainable practice, where we're going to be looking at autism, strengths and challenges. And this continues our talk about, and our focus down on neurodivergence. We then go into Practice Matters, where today we have an interview, as Rory has already introduced and mentioned, with Sharon McCormick on finding work through employment assistance programs, EAPs. Really interesting. You don't want to miss that. There's lots of work there. And then we move on to student services, where we recognise you are students on your formal journey to get out there and be helpers, to make a difference in the world. And today we're going to be speaking about closing of a skills session. But let's start off with that ethical, sustainable practice, Rory. We're speaking about autism, strengths and challenges. Why would we kind of put strengths and challenges together with autism?
Well, I think that it's kind of quite widely understood now that those people who are autistic may find some tasks easy to do and some areas of their life a bit of a struggle. And actually, Dr. Stephen Shaw, the professor of special education at Adelphi University in the USA, who has written a lot about this, states that just like the rest of humanity, autism is an extension of the diversity found in the human gene pool. So while some autistic people may have challenges in communication or social interaction, every autistic person is different. And, you know, we've said this on the podcast before. Once you met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Autistic people, like the rest of humanity, are very, very different. However, there are some specific strengths that we may see in autism. And it doesn't mean that every autistic person is, a maths genius or, can have a huge memory or something like these. These are very much stereotypes. But it does mean that people who are autistic may lean towards certain occupations, in the sciences, in maths, in physics, that type of thing. And, you know, there's a few notable people in that area. Elon Musk, for instance, a person who's in the news who's autistic. He's an industrialist and a car maker. And then on the other side of it, you've got Greta Thunberg, who's a a climate activist. Again, someone who is in the news. But I think what we have to be aware of is that when we're meeting anyone in the therapy room, we're meeting an individual person. We're not meeting a set of diagnosis or a stereotypical view of who they are. What we need to do is find out who they are first, and that takes a little bit of time through the arc of therapy. I do think that for some autistic people, that their energy levels fluctuate up and down. So some people are very good in the morning. They got a lot of energy in the morning, but in the afternoon they may find, just the most simplest of things, a bit of a struggle because they've used their energy up. And I also think we can't really talk about this subject, Ken, without talking about masking, because for some neurodivergent people or some autistic people, they have to map themselves to the world they're in, which may be not a world that they exist in. So things like social interaction, they may have to socially interact with people, but that can take a lot of energy, having to work out what other people are saying and discussing and how they are. So there's a lot to think about when I think you're working with autistic people. But I will come back to the main point. We see people first, and then we work around the idiosyncrasies of who they are in terms of their outlook on life and maybe the fact that they are neurodivergent.
Beautiful intro to that, Rory. Yes, and yes again. And, why are we talking about this? Well, maybe you as a counsellor, a psychotherapist, you're looking to welcome neurodivergent clients into your therapy room. And this is important for us to discuss and understand. And as you said, Rory, if we look at the entirety of humanity, everybody has strengths and challenges. We all do. It's just part of being human. There'll be things that you're good at and things that maybe you're not so good at. You'll hear often people say, I'm not very good at doing X, Y, or Z. And those are the areas of challenge for that person for whatever reason they are. However, when we look to the research, specifically within autism, there are certain traits that are more common. This does not mean that these are the traits that everybody that is autistic has. They're more commonly occurring in an autistic individual, and they may be, and you touched on one of them, which may be challenges interacting socially. Now, it doesn't mean that every autistic person has these challenges interacting socially. Some autistic people love interacting and being social, but generally, if you look at across the autistic community, there will be a higher incident of communication challenges. And those communication challenges can, as you said, be quite energy intensive for that person. You mentioned masking. The person has to be there, hyper-focused and really 100% present, to pay attention, to be present within the communication. And that takes a lot. It really does take a lot. So understanding where a person's strengths and challenges lies in general is useful in therapy. But specifically, if we are welcoming a neurodivergent person into our therapy room, understanding where they see their own strengths and their own challenges can really be helpful. And this goes into other neurodivergence as well. For example, I am autistic. So at school, one of my challenges was anything that was written. And I say at school, but it actually went with me through the entirety of my life. So I struggled in school. I just couldn't get the spelling no matter how hard I tried. And I put so much energy into it and was always failing within that, which left me feeling, why am I different? Why can't I do this? Why can everybody else do this? And it also gained me labels because of the time, because of maybe the lack of training within the teachers at the time of what neurodivergence is, and knowing that dyslexia is part of that. I was told I was lazy. I wasn't trying hard enough. I wasn't putting in enough effort, where the opposite was true. I was putting in loads of effort. They just wouldn't stick. That went through with me into my adulthood, where if I went in for a job application and they handed me a clipboard with a form and said, just fill this out, I instantly went into a trauma response. I'll be honest with you. I would start sweating. I would appear nervous. I would appear awkward. And I'm thinking, they're going to look at this and they're going to instantly see that I can't spell. They're going to think I don't care. They're going to think that I'm less intelligent. And there's a lot that goes with these strengths and challenges that we don't see. It's the what that person experiences behind it. So more challenges might be that the autistic individual may be sensitive to light. They may be sensitive to certain noises. They may be sensitive to certain perfumes or smells within the therapy room. And of course, we can make reasonable adjustments if we understand what they are to be able to accommodate that. So if the person is really sensitive to light and you've got a chair that faces an open window, you might close the curtains for that person if they have given you that information. But they will give you that information if you can ask for it in a respectful way. And I guess the opposite of challenges, because I've focused on a few here, is that everybody has strengths, and there's no different with autistic people. They will have their strength areas. One strength that is pretty common amongst autistic people is, and again, not all autistic people, but common, is having a special interest in a certain area. I certainly have special interests. Rory, I know you've got special interests.
Yes.
We both proudly own our label of neurodivergence. I'm sticking it on myself here. And, if you understand what somebody's strengths are, you can key into that as well. If the person may present in therapy, you can see their energies are very, very low. They're not showing up as they normally show up. Chances are they've had an interaction or something has happened that day that has depleted their energy. They've maybe faced some challenges and the energy is depleted. And if you know what their strengths are, you can talk about those. You can lean towards those. So, for example, if the person has a special interest in a certain area, you might ask them how that's going, and it may energize them and bring a little bit of a spark back into how they are within the room. So that's kind of a very brief overview of why it's important that we understand those strengths and challenges, Rory.
Yes, and I think that what you've outlined is true. I was having a bit of a giggle, Ken, at the special interest. Although not all autistic people have special interests, I think it's fair to say that in myself I identify that I could talk all day about certain subjects, and I've now learned that these are very, very interesting to me. They may have limited interest to other people. And that took me nearly half a lifetime to work out. I think one of the things we should touch on is relationships, because many years ago I taught a student, and I hope she's listening, who has an autistic son, and he came home and he was about, I want to say about 14 years old. And he said, Mum, I've given up on friends. And she said, why? She said, because they always let me down. And I think that one of the things that I've noticed in myself and a lot of other autistic people I've met is that they tend to be very loyal and very honest people. And deception sometimes, or people not being truthful, can be quite hurtful and quite confusing. And I don't think it'd be the first time that I've seen someone in my therapy room who was neurodivergent, who'd felt very let down by people because they'd come to the relationship being very honest and very loyal, and sometimes that is very difficult to realise that not everybody else is like that. And I thought that was incredibly sad that that young person had given up on friendships because they'd all ended up with crushing disappointment. So that's something that you might have presented in the therapy room. And I think it's really useful. As therapists, we tend to be, I would hope that we're always as honest as we can be and as congruent as we can be. And I do think that there's a little bit of theory we could draw on here, because I think for autistic people, all, conditions of worth and introjected values, that of which you've spoken at the top of this, about not being able to read or struggle with writing, are a big thing. I know that was in my life. I mean, I went for a job and I said I'm dyslexic, to which the person actually replied, "So you're a bit thick, are you?" Needless to say, I don't think the interview progressed much further than that. But that's the kind of experience that autistic people can have. And I think we need to keep that tuned into our minds when we're working with neurodivergent people, that their difference can be quite they could be quite sensitive about it because of how the world treats them. Now, what I want to say is I think the world is getting better. Certainly, my experience, I have an autistic grandson, and we keep a very eager eye on him, parents and of course ourselves as grandparents. And it's interesting. I think that the tide is turning. I think a lot of people now are more accepting of neurodivergence, and I think that's because there's been a lot of work in the media, a lot of work, and I think a lot of neurodivergent people or autistic people are now, in front of us in the media, on TV. So we're beginning to see that, but it is an emerging thing. But yeah, I come back to it again, Ken, seeing people as people first, and then working with whatever they bring. And it might be that it's the little things like eye contact. Not every autistic person wants eye contact. So I was speaking to a colleague of mine who works with an autistic child, or a child who is autistic, and they put the chairs back to back, so they don't have to look at each other. That's what the client says. I prefer to back to back, and that's how the therapy is conducted. Quite the opposite to how we normally see it, where people face each other. So I think an aspect of creativity, an aspect of inquiry, is really important when we're working with the neurodivergent community, and where we can, making those reasonable adjustments, even if they feel a little bit different from us. Someone says, "Can you close the curtains?" It's going to be dark. I don't like the dark. Well, that might be work the therapist has to work on, because we're there in service of the client. Is that making sense, Ken? Sometimes
yes.
our frame of reference, we have to kind of put to one side to make sure that the person in front of us is being best served.
Yeah. And bravo, really. That is so beautifully said, Rory. I agree that there is more information than has been around in recent years. There's more research that is coming to light. I think that the internet and everyone having a voice, specifically on social media, is helping, because an autistic individual or a neurodivergent individual can claim that. They can speak out and be proud of that. I am a proud advocate of autism. I am autistic. And I think welcoming neurodivergence into our counselling rooms, well, the truth is, chances are, if you're in practice, if you look to the statistics of the population, chances are you've had neurodivergent clients before.
Yeah.
What is different? Well, we can ask. We can see how we can better serve by having the conversation. Specifically, if the person presenting says that they are autistic or neurodivergent, we can ask different questions in the way that we might work. We can quite happily ask, what kind of challenges do you face, and how can we work on that here within the room? How do you prefer to sit? How is eye contact for you? Is that uncomfortable for you? And you can feel that out. And a autistic person is not going to feel that those are invasive questions. These are the challenges that this person may face on a daily basis. It is refreshing to have somebody ask and care about that, and you as a practitioner can do so. And we're spending time on challenges here. I'm going to go back to school, Rory, with my challenge with the spelling. So therefore, in English, I really struggled. However, so my English lesson. However, I was really good at standing up and speaking. So if I had information and then I put it in my head, I could stand up and I could deliver that and speak it really, really well, but I couldn't write it. And there you go. There's a strength and a challenge. And I guess a reasonable adjustment, had it been picked up back in the day, is that instead of writing papers, questions and putting an answer in, a reasonable adjustment could have been that they said, they would read the question to me and ask me to verbally answer it and then have somebody kind of fill that in. That did not exist in my day. I know it does today, and that is great to see. But there is how a strength can offset a challenge just by asking a question and knowing that it exists. When I went for my formal autism diagnosis, now this is interesting. I went into the room and the psychiatrist was there that was asking me the questions. And after about 15 minutes, I said, please can we take that clock off the wall and just put it outside the door? And it was just a regular clock that you would have in a regular room. These were not purpose-made rooms. This was a traveling psychiatrist who would go from borough council to borough council in the United Kingdom doing these assessments. And it was just my day in a medical room. And the clock was ticking. And I guess a neurotypical person might struggle to hear the clock tick and would have to listen really carefully to that. However, for me, the loudness of the clock tick was as invasive as the voice of the person. In other words, they were competing, and I had to really focus to filter out the ticking clock to listen to the person. And I felt free enough to say, you know what, can we take the clock out of the room? I guess for that individual, and she did mention it at the time, she said, oh, wow, I didn't realize. I will now ask when I do further assessments about the clock. Are you okay with the clock if there is a clock in the room? And this is how I guess we educate one another through kindness. And of course, we have the Working with Autism course at Counselling Tutor. If you're interested in that, counsellingtutor.com. The wait list is open for that. You can go and join us, because the more that we educate ourselves on this, I guess the more inclusive we can be as counsellors and as psychotherapists, Rory.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't leave any client behind where possible. We should always offer a service which includes everybody where we can. And I think that's really important. And I think another important thing to say is that this is very much a developing cohort of humanity. We're really only at the beginning, I think, of engaging with neurodivergence and understanding its nuances and how it presents in people. Certainly when I train, and I do this on every podcast, Ken, when I trained 20 years ago,
back in the day,
I just take my teeth out of the glass and pop them in. This was never ever discussed.
No,
it was never ever discussed, like your experience, like both our experiences at school. And now it's being seen and spoken about, and people are campaigning about it, and the language is being developed. So I guess we're living in a time where it's seen being autistic or being neurodivergent is seen as another facet of humanity, and I'm sure in the future that will develop. But yeah, and I'd encourage those listening to speak to the supervisors or speak to their peers, and maybe just take a little bit of reflection. Have you got anybody seeing anybody now who may show those traits of autism, and are you making reasonable adjustments? I mean, as anybody said, I could, I fidget a lot. Having a fidget toy available or just some things that people can fidget with. You don't have to promote them; you just have them on the table. People can pick them up. So there's lots of areas where we can really support neurodivergent individuals, and rightly so, because it's another aspect of diversity. And as therapists, we try and strive to work with diversity and understand diversity in all its forms, Ken.
Oh, definitely. It's would be unthinkable if you had a person that had mobility challenges, that was wheelchair bound, got to your therapy room, and you had stairs in your therapy room, and you had not mentioned this or made this apparent beforehand, and the person said, I need assistance getting up the stairs. And if we then said, well, that's your problem, you should be able to make your way up the stairs, that is unthinkable. We can see that is unethical. Nobody would even think of acting in that way. However, we can inadvertently discriminate, I guess, by not understanding if we're working with a neurodivergent person and they have challenges that we are unaware of. We are inadvertently doing the same kind of thing. We're discriminating. We spoke about a little bit earlier about how it might feel a little bit uncomfortable as the counsellor to close your curtains because the light is hurting or is too intense for that client. We'd have to ask to know that first, or maybe we might see that discomfort within them. But we make those allowances. Why? Because it is the right thing to do, and asking and understanding is the right thing to do. And we focused a lot on the challenges here, but the strengths are interesting as well. And it's been mentioned, but there is no one size fits all. Everybody is an individual. Every neurodivergent individual is individual. There's no, I don't want to stereotype. It's not that everybody is a Rain Man. Everybody is a savant. Everybody can play a musical instrument from the age of 3. Yes, that does exist, but it is not the norm, and it is not common. But it is common that a neurodivergent individual with autism may have interests in special areas, and they will be they will be really strong in these areas. They will be very well read up on whatever that interest might be, and at a time when the person might be experiencing a challenge, they may arrive at your therapy room and be visually distressed. You can see that their energies are lower than they normally are. Chances are they may have had a challenging interaction within their day. You might ask them to share that with you, or you may not. But what you can do is maybe key into one of their strength areas to counterbalance that, to give them an opportunity to breathe, a little bit of an escape from the darkness or the heaviness of that challenge that they may have faced. So, for example, if the person does have a special interest in a certain area and you know what that is, you can mention it. You can say, how's it going with X, Y, and Z? And you may notice that it gives a little bit of a spark, that they're able to breathe again, that they're able to interact for a little moment. And yes, that's stepping out of therapy. Yes, of course it is. But it is therapeutic to that person, and it is in service of that person. And if it allows them a little bit of a break to get some energy back to be able to engage in therapy, then it is in service. And all of this, I guess, we just, like you say, Rory, it's forever changing. That's why we've built the course on this. CounsellingTutor.com is where you can join that waiting list for working therapeutically with autistic clients. And we'll continue this focus as we go forward, Rory, for at least another few of our Counselling Tutor podcasts, because it's an important topic, needs to be spoken about. Any final thoughts as we think about autism strengths and challenges, Rory?
Well, I mean, I think that what we need to do is take the standard stereotypical counselling hour and everything within it, and think that any of those is up for adaptation. And I was just thinking, as a final thought, Ken, you may get a client who says, I can only do half an hour today.
Yes.
I can only do half an hour. That's fine. Or any chance the next session I could do 1.5 hours. We might have to think, therapists might think, well, it's an hour, isn't it? Counselling is an hour. I don't think we need to be too dogmatic. When we're working with the panoply of humanity, maybe you go, all right then, 1.5 hours. You know, if this is your work and you charge, you may have to alter the fee, but be creative within the space. And remember that, I guess, just to pick up on what you were saying about someone talking about something of special interest, it may not sound like therapy per se, but for that person to be able to talk about, I don't know, I'll talk about one of my special interests, resonant frequencies of antennas. They may not be able to speak about that to anybody else. They may not have anybody else who are willing to listen to that. And just have to have someone who listens. And this comes again back to Rogers, just to have someone who listens to someone and who takes the time to understand and gives that space is therapy. It is therapy. And I think that as we go forward, therapists are going to, and certainly through the arc of this course that we're running, I think people will start to recreate the therapeutic environment to fit neurodivergent people maybe better.
Yes,
hopefully.
That you've said, I think, is the key point here. It's great. We can read the books, we can read the research papers, we can have an understanding of neurodivergence, we can understand autism, we can understand how people might present, we can get a flavour of what that might be like for that person. But at the end of the day, how do you transfer that into your practice? How do you make the reasonable adjustments in your therapy? I think that is the key here. I know, Rory, you spent best part of over a year building our course on working therapeutically with autistic clients. And part of that course, when you buy that course, there is a live element to that course as well. And the live element is an implementation workshop. You've got all the theory and everything you need from the course. There it is. Read it, look at all the references, read the additional read. You can have all the information. But we hold that workshop so that those that take our course can take that information and apply it into their therapy. Everything from the listing on their professional profile to what's written on their website to the contract that they may hand out, the whole of that client's journey, you can hold that person. And I think it's important. It's recognizing the need to do the CPD. And I guess not only is it the right thing to do, we're legally bound, Rory, by the law, specifically here in the UK. We're legally bound, to be open and to make reasonable adjustments where they are required for any type of otherness. Wow, what a topic, hey?
Yeah, great topic, Ken.
So, ethical, sustainable practice. We now move on to practice matters. CPD section. Get those pens ready to put your CPD points in as you listen to the interview with Sharon McCormick that Rory held beautifully on finding work through employment assistance programs. What can we expect, Rory? Give us a taster.
Well, I mean, the thing is that everybody wants to earn money from their hard-earned studies, and those who go into employment rightly deserve to be paid for their skills and their commitment to the work they do. One of the ways that we can get work in counselling is to join an employment assistance program. I spoke with Sharon McCormick, who outlined what a EAP or an employment assistance program is, and finding a good employment assistance program that supports clients, supports yourself, and indeed pays the bills. This is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Employment assistance programs are the backbone of supporting employees in work who may have a number of difficulties, be they physical illness, emotional difficulties, or just difficulties in life, to support them to come back to work and to come back to work in a healthy state. Which is why I'm so delighted to be speaking today with Sharon McCormick from the Listening Centre, who runs an EAP, an Employment Assistant Programme. So Sharon, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Rory.
So first of all, maybe outline for those who don't know, what is the Employment Assistance Programme?
Yeah, good question. I guess it depends on who you ask, but I suppose from my perspective, what we do is provide an external service to an organisation that looks after their staff's well-being, essentially. So we're contracted in by companies to provide this service for them. And they are services that encompass things like talking therapy. We provide signposting. We do clinical assessments. We do mediation services. We provide training, which is an add-on extra. We also do trauma support for those customers who ask for it.
Yes, so I think it'd be fair to say that your specialism around mental and emotional well-being, where some EAPs may, work with physiotherapy or something like that, or work in a slightly different way. So I've actually worked for you. Full disclosure here, I've actually worked for you, and I found the whole process seamless, and it was a joy to work with you. I only worked with you for a short time because my practice changed and I moved on to doing other things. But in general, how, if there's someone listening thinking, this sounds like a good idea, working for an EAP, what would be their first points of contact? How would they contact you?
I think we operate a little differently in the Listening Centre because we're a regional-based EAP. We primarily provide face-to-face counselling to companies in the central UK region. So for us, the team that we have in situ are long-standing counsellors that have been with us a long time. And we're not openly recruiting for counsellors. That being said, the national EAP landscape looks quite different. So where there are many national EAPs who do actively recruit counsellors, they have their own recruitment process. They have their own forms to fill in. They have their own criteria. So my advice to anybody who's thinking about working for an EAP as a separate income stream for private practice is actually go on to the EAP Association website, because they've actually got a guide, and it's called Counsellor's Guide to Working with EAPs. And it is a brilliant document that outlines all the things that counsellors would want to know prior to approaching an EAP.
Yes, so I think that's an interesting thing, that you're a small specialised operation. At the moment, you're not actively recruiting. Now, those of us who watch the kind of press and may have been following the Facebook and the Twitterati, the X factor, whatever it's called nowadays, Elon Musk's hobby, will have noticed that there'd been an increase in certainly complaints, certainly quite a serious complaint against one specific EAP, which is not you. Now, you've been asked on the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, to talk about EAP. So I wonder what you can share about that experience.
Yeah, this was last year. I was approached by an investigative journalist who was given my details from the BACP, and my understanding is that they were starting to do some investigating of an EAP, and they approached the BACP to ask, in terms of the EAP landscape, who could we talk to that operates best practice that we could use as a benchmark against, essentially, in terms of how it should be. And they cited me, my company, which was a bit of a surprise. That being said, she messaged me and rang me, and I actually kept saying no. I think there were 3 times she tried me to say, come and talk to me, and I was very, very resistant. But eventually I buckled, and she interviewed me, and I didn't know at the time what it was for. All I knew is she was just investigating EAPs. So, yeah, it was a surprise, and I found out what the outcome of that was when everyone else did when it was broadcast in March this year.
Yes. And I think the outcome of that and the investigation, and it's well publicised. I'm not going to mention the name of the company. I'm sure people can rattle away on their keyboards at home and work that out themselves. But there was one specific EAP that was allowing corporate clients, in other words, those clients who were paying for the service, to listen in, unbeknown to the therapist, on calls. And that, I guess, shocked the counselling world to the core.
It is shocking because, of course, any reputable training establishment, at the core of that, the concept of being a therapist is confidentiality. You know, it's what glues us into our ethical framework. So, yeah, it is a shocking thing to be aware of if that happened.
Yes, and I think that's the thing. If that happened, I will let people search the internet for whatever story they come up with. And I think it's really important to state that the therapist and certainly the client who were listened to had absolutely no idea. This was maybe telephone based, I think. And what happened was that this particular organisation had the facility to silent listen and listening. And there's been a number of sightings, if you like, of this that's happened with some. So I think it's really important to get an idea that, you know, you as the listening centre work really ethically. Most of yours is face-to-face, I'm guessing, as opposed to online. But in terms of the online piece, I think what people have to realise is that for those who are working with online EAPs, they go through the EAP's own platform. So they'd log into the platform and work through that. So that's quite concerning. So in terms of confidentiality, obviously the client gets in contact with you. Well, what is the path? So someone goes to their HR department, they need a bit of support, they're referred to you. What's that process like then as soon as that referral's made?
It depends on how the organisation uses our service. So there's two ways. One is it could be a managed referral. So a nominated person within the organisation, either HR or Rocky Health, would be the nominated person that would gatekeep that referral. So someone would go to HR and they would then access our live portal and they would make that electronic referral. So it then comes into our system and then we take over from there. Or an organisation may have what's called a self-referral service. So people can just contact us and say, I want to access talking therapy or I want to know where I can go for help. So those are the two routes in. And then from that point, we have that initial telephone call that gets all the details, finds out all the information we can that we need to establish where are they best located and who is the best therapist in our team to work with them based on what the client's happy to share at that point in time. So we try and match up as best we can. Firstly, geography is important. And we always give clients the choice, you know, would you like to work with someone near home, near work or somewhere different? And if there's this particular issue they want to work on, then we would look to see who in the team has got that specialist training and as best we can match that so that they're getting the best help from the right therapist.
Yeah, so there's a triage situation that goes through. So an experienced therapist will hear the client and at that point will refer them to, you know, either somewhere local to them that's convenient and also choose the therapist that has a matching skill set. That on the face of it, you know, clients don't always tell us every bit of information, but from what you've garnered from the interview, I guess, a therapist that would be best to work with their issues. So that I guess leaves the therapist. How is the therapist contacted, and how does that work?
Well, can I just go a little bit further back because you were just talking there about when people contact us and they are the triage is done by a trained therapist, and it may or may not be.
Oh, okay.
So we do have a service coordinator. So typically any calls coming in will be handled by them, and we're very transparent that we say it isn't a trained counsellor that you may have that initial call with, but we do. We all sit in the office together. So if there's anything happening, we then just pass it on to each other. We can do that because we're a small operation.
Then how is the therapist alerted to the fact that they've got a client, how do you make contact with them? What's the procedure there?
Our live portal provides us with a picture as to who is available to take on referrals. So the counsellor can log on themselves and say, I'm available, I'm not. So we then try and match people up as best we can. And as soon as we've allocated that therapist, which is a click of a button on our system, the counsellor is automatically emailed with a request to log on to the portal because they've got a new client referred to them. So they then log on and then they make that initial contact and log that in our system. So we can see that they are making contact.
Okay. And then from then, I guess the therapist contacts the client directly, makes the appointment, and then they meet up. Now, what about things like contracts and confidentiality? Does the counsellor use their own contracts and their own confidentiality, or do they work through your systems?
So there are a couple of contracts in place to protect the client and the counsellor and us. And that happens even before the service goes live with the customer. So we have what's called a service level agreement. So we sit down with the customer and we outline the parameters within which we'll work. The customer then signs that, and it outlines everything from how they would access our services to how many sessions the client initially is given to how much, and things like confidentiality and termination, etc. So it covers everything. So the customer is aware of what we will and won't share even before they start using our services. So when our clients get in touch with us or they're put on our system, as soon as their email is entered into our system as a new referral, they get pinged by our portal and they get sent a fact sheet. So that's like an FAQ page, and it also doubles up as a contract. So it's really to help that client prepare as best as they can for that first appointment, to save time, to give them that space to digest what it is that they're signing up for, so to speak. And we also ask them to sign what's called a client agreement form, which is, okay, I've read that, I understand it, and I'm agreeing to have this intervention from this therapist. So even before the therapist and the client meet, the client will have been given that information in advance. And if they're not IT literate, for example, or the email goes in the bin, the counsellor will have an hard copy of that with them, and they'll go through it because they check with the client, have you read that? Have you understood it? Have you signed this? And if not, we'll then go through that as soon as they meet them.
Sure. And in terms of notes, obviously counsellors take notes. So are those notes shared with you, or do the counsellors just keep their own notes? How does that work?
We have a system on the portal that counsellors need to fill in. So it's an electronic form that they log on and complete. So all of that is taken care of within our system. Yeah.
And I guess finally, well, not finally, but what number of sessions are offered? So if someone is referred to you, what is the maximum number of sessions you may offer someone?
It's a great question. And I differ, I think, from a lot of EAPs at this juncture, because whilst we initially contract for 6 sessions, and, in the grand scheme of things, we actually probably see clients for less than 6. However, if a client comes to us and after a number of sessions, it's clear that they might need more, if it's a work-based issue, we would be talking to the employer or seeking the client's permission to request more sessions. And we would be asking that question to the employer to agree to give us more if there's a clinical need. So we always go back to what the counsellor thinks is the right thing, and we trust our therapists. They're doing an amazing job. I trust their judgment, and if they think clients need more sessions, then I will support that request to the employer. Equally, the employer trusts us that if we think they need more, then they need more. And there's always going to be that middle ground where if it's a long-standing issue or it's a trauma based in childhood, it's not appropriate to request a company to pay for that long-term open-ended work. But what we will do is work hard with the client to signpost them or get help to a longer-term service. And if it means us providing some bridging sessions to hold that client from one intervention to another, then that's what we'll also do.
Yeah.
So we work very ethically, with the best interest of the client always.
Yes. And I guess if a client was to present, and then the therapist's view that they needed the input of maybe the community mental health team or the drugs and alcohol team, how would that work? Would that be something that would be suggested to the client, or something that would be reflected in a referral directly to you?
As soon as we identify as a team that this client might need longer term help, that is the point that we will talk to the client about that. Because the client is aware from the outset that this is a short-term intervention. So they know that. It's in the fact sheet. It explains in there what happens if I need more sessions, etc. So it will come of no surprise to the client that they know they're not going to get, open-ended therapy. However, we will do everything we can, and we really do. We go above and beyond to provide that signposting service. I myself have been known to ring NHS services and say, right, what's going on? How can we do this? What can we do to speed that up, etc. We want them to get the help. When people reach the point where they need therapy, they're pretty desperate, and we don't want to add to that desperation.
No, absolutely not. So it sounds like you've, from the initial triage session right through to the working with the counsellor, who can make an assessment on whether the client needs more sessions or maybe need a different support. You're really there in both the clients and to some extent the counsellor's corner, making sure that happens, making sure that is a seamless pathway to the best support that can be offered at the time.
Absolutely, as much as we can. And we never get it always right. There's always going to be something that happens that tests us and challenges us. Like any therapist, we have ethical dilemmas all the time. And, it stops us in our tracks and we put our pens down and think, right, what are we going to do now? Those calls happen quite regularly with the team. But the point is we work collaboratively and we think, right, okay, what's the best thing here for everybody? We might have an employee who's coming to counselling and they've said, well, my boss says I can have as many as I need. But it's not about that. It's about whether the counsellor thinks that's the right thing for that client based on where they are in their journey. So there's a lot of avoidance goes on sometimes with companies, or there's, in the best will in the world, they're trying to do the right thing, but it might not be the right thing.
Yes, I've had people refer to me where someone said they're going to need a lot of therapy, and in fact, that is obviously about autonomy and what the client wants, and in my experience, a lot of therapy can be 3 sessions and they're pretty much back on track again. Other people's perceptions. Now, I guess there'll be people sitting at home or in the cars, or they may be doing the jogging or whatever people do while they listen to the podcast, are saying, well, this is all well and good, Rory, but what about the fees? What about the money? Now, I don't want you to talk specifically about how much you pay, because this podcast may be around for a few years. But in terms of the market as it stands for fees, where do you fit in terms of in the market in terms of the EAPs?
Right question. I think I'm probably in the middle.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah. I mean, when I first started the business, I was working with public sector organisations like local authorities. And as you know, working in public sector, the money's always tight. Then we went through austerity in 2008, which I thought, that's it, it's all over. But actually it wasn't for me, because I sustained the fees and I was working very ethically. So I would pay my therapist what I expected to be paid in the market. And then I charge the customers any overheads and then a little bit of profits. That's how I've always worked it out. And again, I don't charge customers what an EAP typically would do, because for us it's a pay as you go. Whereas most EAPs is how many employees have we got? Okay, this is going to cost you this much per year, based on price per head. So we don't work that way. Our pricing structure is very different. So I always want my counsellors to be paid an ethical rate, and I make an ethical charge to my customer to run the business.
Yeah. And of course, you are a business, and tea bags aren't cheap, as I always tell people. And cost of tea bags is going through the roof. Certainly Earl Grey. So
it's Pepsi Max in my book. It's not tea.
It's Pepsi Max.
That's my guilty pleasure.
Yeah. So in other words, we all need to earn a living.
Something that's impacted on me quite significantly was in lockdown, and I was surfing Facebook, our good old friend. And I'm part of a HR, or as was at the time, of HR group. And what I noticed was that whenever anyone in the UK was asking, I need an EAP for my company, who can I use? They would come up with the same names time after time after time. And there was one day I kind of saw red, and I'm like, why aren't they messaging and asking for local EAPs, not like me? And it then dawned on me, I had a bit of an epiphany, that there aren't any. There are so few of us doing what I do, which is a regional service. So I decided at that time to teach people to do what I do. So from that point, I put together a 10-session course for counsellors to essentially copy how I have managed to create the listening centre and do it in their own area, because I have no desire to get any bigger. I don't want to expand and take over the world. But I also want counsellors to know that it isn't sort of you either work in private practice or you sell your soul to an EAP. There is another way, and that is for you to create your own EAP. If you've got a business acumen and you think you're up for the challenge, because it's certainly not easy, then I've been running this course. I'm running it the fourth one now, and it takes about a year to get through it because there's 10 sessions and it's a 1-hour interactive session. And I basically give away all of my trade secrets, business secrets, all of my materials to help them set up. And now there are little EAPs setting up and down the country on the back of it, which really excites me, because I think counsellors are undervalued, and there is room for all of us. I don't see anyone as a competitor. So please don't give up hope and think that there's no way of me making my own money and earning money in the business world and the business sector. It can be done. I've done it, and no one taught me. So if I can do it, I know other people can do it, and now there's proof. So I just want to give that out there to your listeners.
Well, I mean, what a wonderful gift to give to people to develop your model and take it out in the world, to have an ethical EAP where people can make a living and clients can get the really best service, or the service they deserve. If you're interested in Sharon McCormick's Listening Centre's information, we're going to put some links into the show notes. So if you go to Counselling Tutor, the website Counselling Tutor, go to the podcast tab, click episode 317, click on that, and you'll find all the links to the Listening Centre and all the information that Sharon's been talking about today. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it might inspire you to start your own EAP and put yourself out there and run an ethical EAP. So it just remains for me to say, Sharon McCormick, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Sharon McCormick, and for you, Rory, for holding those all-important discussions and bringing us the CPD on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. That was Practice Matters. We move out of Practice Matters directly into Student Services, where we recognise you, our students, on your formal journey. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting, and it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counselingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counselingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, closing a skills session. I think you'd probably feel cheated If I now said, well, this is the end of episode 317 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Thank you, goodbye.
Yeah.
And you started hearing the ending music now. Why? Because it would be an unexpected ending to the session. The rug might feel pulled from under your feet. And I think we need to think when we're having our skills sessions, how we bring them to an end in a way that is respectful for the speaker. If you're doing it in college or university, or if you're out in placement, of course, to the client, Rory.
Absolutely. And I had the privilege of speaking to some students this week. I was doing a Q&A with some students. And one of the questions that came up was closing your skills session. And it was one of the most interesting questions that I'd ever heard. And the question was, when you close the skills session, and, just to remind ourselves how that is done, we get to, if it's say, for instance, it's a 30-minute session, which it usually is a level 3 for making a recording or certificate for those our friends in Scotland. You usually get to about 5 minutes from the end. You give a 5-minute warning. You say, we've just got about 5 minutes left. And then what you do is you do a summary. And one of the question was, in your summary, do you use factual information? In other words, you're finding it very difficult in your relationship. You're not sure if you should stay. And the decision you seem to have is this going to be the end, and how are you going to move on? Or do you use emotional language and say, you feel that the relationship's come to an end, this is making you feel very sad, and that sadness is about moving into a new life. And the reason for it was that the reason that question came up was how do you close the session down? Because what you don't want to happen is for the person you're working with to then start talking a lot more about what's going on because the session's coming to an end. So I'd be interested in thinking about, what language do we use as we come to the end? And to make it really clear that the session comes to an end, we have to put that boundary in. It does speak to boundaries. We can't let, uncontracted sessions go on for hours. We need to bring it to an end. But how do we do that without the risk of opening up the client again, or not giving the correct summary at the end?
Yeah, great topic, and a great question from that student that asked you that, Rory. I'm going to rewind back before we get to the actual summary and summing up at the end of the skills session to the beginning of the skills session. So at the beginning of the skills session, one of the first things we will say as we kind of go into that skills session, so I'm going to stick with the 30 minutes. I'm going to say this is within a university setting, and 30 minutes have been given to go and practice skills, and it's being observed. Here we go. One of the first things we're going to be saying at the beginning of that skills session is, so we have around 30 minutes for you to bring what you'd like to bring today. And just 5 minutes before the end, I'll just let you know that we're coming to the end. So we're already acknowledging the closing. So yes, when we get towards the end of that skills sessions, we're going to be going, well, I see we now have about 5 minutes left in our session. So we're acknowledging it right at the beginning so that there's no shock to the person. They don't feel like the rug has been pulled from under their feet. And then I think the structure of the skills session itself is quite important. So the skills that we've used, I think it's important to review that. So as we're going on through the arc of the skills session, we'll be using one skill which is really effective, which is paraphrasing. And paraphrasing is can be used to kind of almost bring to the end a chapter, to the end of a chapter, really. It doesn't always happen that it would be used for that, but it can be. So a paraphrase is where a client and you have had an interaction. You may have used a number of skills within that interaction, but it feels like maybe that topic is coming to an end and they want to kind of move on to something else or another element of that topic, another road of that topic, we might just quickly paraphrase. So what I'm understanding is, and we'll put in a little marker there, a little marker of that paraphrase. And we may have, let's say in the 30-minute skill sessions, you may have 2 paraphrases throughout that. Sometimes just 1, depending on how that skill session is going. When we come to that ending bit, we're now going to do a summary. And the summary is where we take the paraphrases that we've already laid. So we've already laid the groundwork of paraphrasing earlier on. We can revisit those paraphrases and touch on those. Now for me, and this is my personal way of working with this, so it doesn't apply to all, I am more leaning towards the focus on the emotions and the feelings that have been brought up rather than the facts that have been brought up. Because I believe that therapy happens within emotions. It doesn't happen within facts. And specifically within person-centered therapy, which is my base modality. And of course, I do blend into that as my practice has matured. But my base modality state remains person-centered. And within person-centered therapy, the emotions are where work is done. The emotions and the feelings is where work is done rather than in the head thinking about it. And of course, in CBT, that's very different. We're going to think about that, and we're going to challenge information and with reasoning. So it's different. It depends on your modality. I see we have about 5 minutes left. I wonder if I might just package together my understanding of what we've covered today. You mentioned, and I'm going back to my little paraphrases, which are my anchors to remind me of the chapters that we've covered, putting that together and almost delivering a package. And what I'm not saying at the end of that session, I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to bring before we end, when there's 2 minutes to go. Yeah. What I might say after the summary is, have I understood that as you've said it? Because what that does is it gives an invite, maybe in the 2 minutes that are now left from your 2.5 to 3 minutes of summarizing, it points back to this that I've just said and the way I've understood how we've presented today and what we've been through today. Is that your understanding too? Because that invites the client to look back and go, yes, I think it does. I still feel X is unresolved, but yes, it kind of captured everything as it is. And I might then end it off with saying, and I recognize that you're still saying that X is unresolved, and I do understand that. And of course, if you wish to, in our next session, that's something that you might choose to bring along. That kind of brings us to the end of our time today. So I point back with the summary. I use the summary as a pointing back, as opposed to just leaving it there and letting the client, I guess, fill the space potentially with a new presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was beautifully framed, Ken. And you're absolutely right. You're using the paraphrases as the hooks, and then you point back to the arc of the session to pick out those points, and in the case that you were outlining, attach the emotions to them. I think there's a counterpoint here. I think if you've got a client who is very, very, very upset, and I've experienced this as a therapist, and you come to the end and they're really, really upset, I think sometimes there is a principled argument and principled position of maybe taking the foot off the emotional gas and being a little bit more factual, because what we don't want to happen is to catapult someone out into the street when they've finished therapy in a state very, very upset. So my response to the student who asked the question was, in some cases, if someone's get really upset, when you do your final paraphrase, it might be useful to kind of touch on the facts, not to overemphasize the emotion, because really you're helping the client get ready to go out into the world. And on a couple of occasions, I've kind of stepped off the more emotional phraseology because I didn't want to upset them again. I can think of a couple of occasions where I've I've spoke very strongly about the emotional phraseology, and they've got, certainly in my early practice, people got really, really upset. So I think it's very nuanced.
Oh,
But
yes.
you're absolutely right, Ken. The summary is a look back over the session, and I think what it should be, it should highlight the key things the client has brought. One of the things in therapy is that they should be taking away. They come with a lot of issues. It's like undoing a ball of wool that's been tied up in knots. And what you're doing as a therapist is you're trying to help undo that for the client. Together, you're doing that to make things look a little straighter, a little clearer. And the paraphrase at the end is mightily useful for that, because they can go away thinking, yes, that's exactly what I said. That's exactly the sort of things I was talking about. And then that may lead into the next session. And we must also not forget that a lot of the good work in therapy is done between the sessions.
Yes.
How many times, Ken, have we had clients who've come back to us and said, do you know, I was thinking this week about our last session. And it usually goes like this. When you told me, and it's like, no, I didn't tell you. No, I didn't tell you. But that's the perception. In other words, what they're really saying is, when you made me aware of what I was saying, when you reflected back my words, I've had chance to think, and that's brought clarity, because they could do that reflection in their own time. Yes. So yeah, as a final point, I'd say a good summary is massively important, because it leads in to that kind of reflection the clients can do between sessions. And sometimes that's where some really good work and growth takes place.
Yes, I like it. It's a great question. It is very nuanced, this. It really is. And it depends on what the arc of that session has been. So when you mentioned the getting to the summary and the client being upset, I would hope that emotion, that high level of emotion, would show itself when talking about those topics, when you're working with the skills with that person. So you're going to have a feeling of that as you get near the end. And there are times where I have, and I will, if I was in the same situation again, I would sacrifice the summary for a holding and a checking that client was okay, yes, and a bringing them, grounding them, maybe using some grounding techniques to bring them back into the here and now. And I would gladly sacrifice a summary at the end of the session. I might get to, this has been an emotional session today. There's been very, very high, whatever that you might say. And then I might put in there, I wonder, kind of, as we look at the last 5 minutes, and I might then just start grounding, holding, checking where that person is, checking what they're going back to, checking if they've got any support outside of the session. So that's where the nuance comes in. One of the things that this is tricky. And again, because it's nuanced, so this doesn't belong under student services, this what really. I'm going to say now. No, yeah. It's more for a qualified therapist that's got some time out there. But one of the things that I put into my initial discussion with a client is that it can sometimes feel like it's getting worse before it gets better, because that's the truth of this. When you start delving into stuff that is maybe hidden from others, stuff that is shame, it can, you got to work through that stuff. Saying it doesn't make it dissipate. It's the process. And like you said, Rory, that process is very often outside of the session. Yes, we work within the session. Yes, it brings it up. Yes, we of course are handling that with our empathy and holding the client. But very often, as you've said, they will go out and continue to process that. And one of the things I also mention to clients, and this is in contracting, before we start working together, there may be times when you come into a counselling session and you actually leave the session feeling worse than when you came in. and that this is a natural part of the processing of the emotions. It makes sense that if you're digging into those deep, hard to face emotions, that you may go out feeling a little worse than you came in. So I'm kind of laying those clues beforehand. And I'm also okay as long as it is safe. And this is important. It's about the safety of the client. And this is why it's not a student topic really, but I'm going to put it in anyway. Yeah. It's sometimes okay for a client to go out feeling those emotions, leaving with those emotions. I'm not saying that I wouldn't kind of hold them as they're going out, but I have had a number of occasions where a client at the end of a session is pretty distraught by what they've looked at. I will try to hold them as much as I can. And it doesn't happen every time, but so often they will come in to the next session and it's almost like it's cleared. They've gone through that energy. They've really faced it. They've really sat with it. Only when it is safe to do so, and that is the caveat on this, and that is done through your assessment, through the arc of the sessions, and knowing who this client is. So yes, not to be used as a student, but nonetheless.
Although Ken, there will be students out there listening who are on placement, who will be working with clients. So maybe we should kind of level this a little bit and say, maybe if you're doing a certificate or you're doing, your introduction, maybe just stick with the summary. But I think when you're working in a real world situation, if you're a diploma student or you're doing a degree or a master's and you're working with clients in doing your practice hours, sometimes you just have to slightly come off piste, as it were. In other words, come off the safe snow and onto the unplowed snow. I think that's what off-piste means. I've never been skiing, but that's what I understand it to be. And so I'm told. And just work at just a little bit more creatively. I guess as tutors ourselves can, when we've worked with students who are doing their practice hours, we've supported them being, shall we say, a little creative when working with clients, to come off piste a little bit, because sometimes the actual theory doesn't quite fit for this client. So in summary, this conversation may be very useful for those of you who are doing your practice hours. If you are doing your introduction or your certificate, maybe stick in the safe snow, on piste as it were, and do a summary. But I think it's a conversation worth having. And I also think it marks the time, certainly for those who are in practice as students, it marks the time where you're starting to develop your practice base, where as you come to the end of your studies and you catapult yourself into qualified life, you've now got those the confidence to be able to just be a little bit creative, as we talked about in the top of the episode, Ken, with working with autism, that we could just work a little bit more creative, but always in the service of the client.
There's no better words to end the Counselling Tutor podcast than always in service of the client, Rory. You've been listening to episode 317 of the Counselling Tutor podcast. The National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, or NCPS, proudly sponsor this podcast, supporting students every step of the way. Join the NCPS for resources, training, and a friendly, knowledgeable community to enhance your learning experience. Visit ncps.com.
Yes, we started in ethical, sustainable practice, continuing our series on autism. And today we touched on autism, strengths and challenges. And don't forget to go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, episode 317. If you click on episode 317, there'll be an article written, and also, as we say, a super duper handout you can download and put in your file and make reference to. In Practice Matters, we had an interview with Sharon McCormick, finding work through employment assistance programs. Employment, for those who are qualified, is important. It's a goal that those who study work towards. And I think this interview was really insightful in showing us what a really well-run and well thought out EAP provider offers both clients and therapists. And then finally, Ken and myself had a little wander down closing a skill session. In student services, we looked at endings, and in particular, the summary and how summaries are conducted. And before we exit out of this episode, I'd like to thank all those people who've left lovely reviews on iTunes and Podchaser and all the places where you get your podcast. We always love that people have listened and reflected back to us what value they've got from the podcast. So if you're minded, why not just leave us a review? Ken and myself regularly have a look, and it always lifts our spirits when we get a lovely review. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.